Cambridge and Rashawn is a Weirding Way Media podcast.
D-E-V-O!
Finally, really did it. You maniacs! You blew it up! Oh, damn you! God damn you all to hell!
Hello and welcome to Cambridge and Washawn, a podcast by two weird guys about the weird things that they like. My name is Ronnie, otherwise known as Skelevator, and I'm here with my friend Mark.
Hi, I am Mark Bigley, the host of Wake Up Heavy and co-host of Cambridge and Washawn and co-host of the Chasing Chevy.
Oh, yeah.
And a Chevy podcast that will be coming out in April.
And if you're new to this, Mark and I have been friends for ages, and we've always gotten together and talked about this stuff, and that's why we decided to turn this into a podcast. You have some updates.
I do.
So let's get into those.
As usual, I wanted to update my $6 Million Man replacement arm skin situation because I was waiting for that massive bag of balloons that I had ordered, and I got them shortly after we recorded and worked on getting one on his arm. I split about 3 or 4 of them before I figured out I had to go about it a different way, and the 5th one went on like a charm. Once I figured out the motion of working it up the arm, it went on pretty easily. It's very thin, though, compared to the original, so I suspect that, I didn't mean to imply that the originals were just latex balloons, but the replacement skins that you see on eBay definitely are. So,
right.
Buyer beware. But the old one that I had taken off is considerably thicker, and that could just be shrinkage from over the years.
You don't understand. There was shrinkage.
I believe it was a heavier duty latex than these balloons. They're very, very thin, but you can do it. So I still have them if anybody wants any.
99 flesh balloons.
Yes. They are very fleshy.
The trials and tribulations of flesh balloons. This could go on and on. It's such a weird thing. I love it.
And then I think this was actually, he'd been working on this for a while, but friend of your show, Mortarheads, released a Maskatron mask recently with a Steve Austin cover. So you get the Maskatron mask that looks like the figure, and then you get a mask of Steve Austin that you can put over it. It's pretty awesome. Way out of my price range, but that was happening right at the same time.
Mark Enright from Mortarheads is great. It's almost, he's one of those characters out there in the world that I feel like no matter what you and I talk about, or no matter what is of interest to me at a particular moment, for some reason, Mark is like right on it. He's like, his masks are amazing. If those of you who are not familiar with Mortarheads, go check him out. He's traditionally known for, lately at least, his latex masks of vintage action figures. So he's done Star Wars, he's the Star Wars Kenner figures, the creatures mainly, and then he's done some of the creatures, and then he's done Masters of the Universe action figures, and those were actually picked up, some of them were picked up by NECA and released online, and then now he's doing this. The guy's great. He's very talented. I love his work.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I'm expecting him to, after this episode of ours, and not because he listens, but to come out with something based on what we're talking about today.
Yeah, makes sense. Would make very good sense. And then a little correction. I looked into Frankenhooker.
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't quite confident about the Trauma Association, and looked it up online and found the distribution company actually listed on Wikipedia, I believe, and it wasn't Troma. So I could have sworn it was that movie. May still have been, but could have been false information.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why that association would be made, and it made sense to me when you mentioned it. So I was like, yeah, that movie is, in thinking about it, a movie is almost too good. Does that make sense for Troma? I mean, that's harsh. That's a harsh critique, but yeah, that makes sense. I could see it being a Troma film. Yeah.
Well, distributed by Troma is what I was
distributed.
But they actually specifically named the distribution company, because a lot of times for these movies, they'll have when it was first released on VHS or DVD or Blu-ray and names the company that did that, and they did, and it was not Troma. Now, that's not to say they didn't distribute it later on in different markets or something.
Right.
And then I had a funny thought. I had mentioned the World Magazine photo shoot that I did at the Underground Gardens, and you had mentioned that your dad, used to take photographs there, and I was like, wouldn't that be funny if your dad was the guy that they had tasked with taking those photos?
That's funny.
And I cannot find an archive for World Magazine. It turned into National Geographic Kids at some point. Trying to look up World Magazine or National Geographic World Magazine, which they kind of already are a world magazine, so it doesn't bring up anything specific enough to search through.
I searched it up too. I did a little research online after we talked, and I couldn't find anything either. And it's funny that you mentioned possibly my dad. I think I would have seen images like this if he had done a project like that. But my cousin, my dad's cousin, my cousin Mike, he was also a Fresno photographer, but did a lot of commercial things. So I'm wondering, maybe there might be something in his archive. Maybe he was tasked to do it.
I don't know that they would use a local photographer, but
they might, save some money. Yeah, I'll look into that a little bit.
Yeah. It could very well be, like I assume, that it just didn't make it to publication, because I had a subscription to the magazine at that time and never saw it.
I think it's adorable, Mark, that there's a negative somewhere in the National Geographic archive of little you in the Underground Gardens.
Little pudgy me.
I was just telling, so I work with international students at Fresno State sometimes, and I was just telling him, one of these students that I was helping him out with some graduate work, academic graduate stuff, and he was asking me what he could do in Fresno before he moves away, and I mentioned Underground Gardens, and he looked at me like, what? Like, what a crazy thing for somebody to have done here. And so, yeah, spreading the weird.
Are we not men? We are Devo. Are we not men? DVO.
Mark, let's start with you today. What is your weird thing that you want to talk about today?
Well, they are weird, that's for sure. And that was one of the big draws for me back then. And this was when I was 11 or 12 when it started. I believe I mentioned this as a possibility last time, and like things happen, it converged with something that was going on with this group, this musical group, right around that time. I think I had just read that Devo were going to be at Sundance to premiere a new documentary about them, and they were going to perform later in the week. And so every day I would see a new little news bite on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, because I follow them on every social media. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's finally happening. And I'll explain that later as to why I thought that. So yeah, today I'm talking about Devo. D-E-V-O! One of my favorite musical acts to this day. And it's one of those, you've talked about how these things come and go. And
oh yeah.
There's always been a kernel of interest in the back of my head when it comes to them. It all started back when I was 11 and Whip It came out. And it was like nothing I'd ever heard before. I was still listening to mostly what my parents would listen to. I think my sister and I were starting to get into radio, our own radio shows, and listening to, what was it, KKDJ and a couple other local places. And they were playing not just rock. It was starting to get into new wave. So you would hear the odd new wave song mixed in with a lot of the classic rock and 70s rock and all that.
Oh, yeah.
Something about Whip It just got me. So I got the 45. I really can't say when I saw the video, because the video presentation of them is what really is the driving force of this. And I remember the energy domes, the turtlenecks that had cut off sleeves and black, it's just a weird video. And then the instruments, it wasn't a keytar, because I don't think those were around yet, but it was, a small keyboard that one of them was just wearing like a guitar. It was fascinating to me. This is another one of those stories where over, that's 44 years ago, I've always figured that I got the first 3 albums, because by the time Whip It came out, this was on Freedom of Choice. That was their 3rd album. They had 2 albums already, which I really don't think I knew anything about up until then. I always had it in my head that I got them all at the same time for one of my birthdays. It would have had to have been actually my 12th birthday the next year, because the album came out in May of 1980. My birthday would have already passed. But I kind of feel like I was so taken with that song that I got Freedom of Choice, and on the back of it, along with little thumbnail pictures of the band members, there were 2 little thumbnails of the first 2 albums. So there was a image of the cover of Are We Not Men and Duty Now for the Future. Their album graphics were also very interesting. So I kind of feel like I had Freedom of Choice, and then on my next birthday, I got the other 2 albums and dove right into those. And if people don't know, and of course nowadays with things not being really sold as albums, although I'm sure you can get all these on vinyl, they really went all out on their graphics and artwork. So on the first album, there are all these stills from videos, and I was like, and this is 1980, MTV is just starting, but these are from 4, 5, 6 years prior to that. So there's all these stills, and it says on the sleeve, on the inner sleeve, what it's from. And it's The Truth About De-Evolution. And I'm like, what is this? And where do I find it? And then they have the lyrics, which is great, and another image from the Satisfaction video that they did. I wouldn't have had any way to see any of that stuff. We didn't have MTV until I was like a junior or senior in high school. It was fascinating. And then the second album, the cover had an image of the band and then all these barcodes, which were fairly new at the time. So it's barcodes and all these little squares, and then an image of the band. And the image of the band, you could pop out. It was perforated like a postcard, something you don't normally see. Freedom of Choice had the first, on the sleeve, it had their catalog. They had a Club Devo, and you could order all this stuff. You could order the yellow suits, you could order energy domes, you could order the 3D glasses. All of that, I would sit and listen to the albums and just pour over the inner sleeves. The first album and the third album are what I really listened to back then. The second album, I never quite understood why, but it didn't really work for me. I think I may have listened to it a handful of times. I popped that picture out of the album cover and have since lost it, but I'm sure I stuck it on my little tack board that I had in my room. Eventually, I placed an order with the order form for the catalog, and I know that I got the 3D glasses, which were just the cheapo, which they probably bought in bulk and sold the extras, but they wore them in concert. They're wearing them on the album cover for Duty Now for the Future, but they would always flip it inside out, and I never really caught on to that, so I just wore them the normal way. Those fell apart, and there was a button that had a girl holding balloons that said Devo. It was a lenticular thing, so when she closed it together, they'd squish like in front of her chest, and never bought an Energy Dome, never bought the yellow suit. I don't think I got what I ordered, and actually I did an episode. I talked to the guy Devo Obsesso a couple years back during the pandemic, who is basically their archivist and their main roadie and stuff when they tour and does all this other work for the band. And he was like, yeah, it was notoriously bad. Like, people never got what they ordered. And it's like, so when I took over, I was not going to let that happen. So if you order something now, you get what you ordered. And
yeah,
they had trading cards. I think I got those, but those are lost to time if I did.
That's amazing. I was, when I first heard Devo, my dad introduced them to me. My dad used to have a pretty cool record collection. I think he still has some of those records, but I remember mixing them up with Kraftwerk a little bit, because the same sort of conceptual approach to album cover art and identifying a kind of aesthetic and sticking to it, really kind of, I connected Kraftwerk and Devo in that regard. And but I had no idea there was such a Kiss-like marketing aspect to Devo, marketing to the fans, having a catalog, having mail away stuff. Like, I mean, I was younger than you in experiencing Devo, so I wasn't thinking about it in that way. But what a cool thing. And I love Devo too. I'm not as much of a fan as you are, in that I don't have that kind of nostalgic connection to them, like deep nostalgic connection. But I love them, and I'm so glad that the Devo archivist, was it Michael? Is it Michael? Mm-hmm. I'm so glad he's still working with them and working with and still promoting the Devo thing.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of the recent stuff later, but yeah, the idea of them performing in costumes, basically, that all match, that they change during the show. I'm reading a book, or just finished reading a book that I bought a while back, one of the current things that I got from them. That's a back-to-back book, so you flip it over and start again. So one side's called Devo the Brand, and the other one is Devo... Oh, shoot, I can't remember. I'll have to squeeze that in here with my robot.
The other half is called Devo Unmasked.
A lot of the articles that are reprinted there mention that Kiss-like thing, and how it's done very differently between the two bands, almost like a cynical thing, with Kiss more like... But there was that tight control, and that's what they liked about Kiss, is we're going to control our stuff. All the stuff they sold through catalogs was them doing it, not Warner Brothers, who is the label that they were on for a number of years. And this stuff like the perforated image, they weren't going to do. And Gerald Casale, who's kind of the leader, the business leader of the band, really said, well, how much would it cost to do that? And they're like, an additional 10 cents an album. And they're like, well, take it out of our earnings. And they did something similar with Oh No, It's Devo later on, where the back popped out like a picture frame. You know, it had a folded thing you could put out and then like stand it up, which I did, because as I looked through my albums the other day, I noticed that the perforation was all split. I had done it that way. But just even printing the catalog itself and the inner sleeve and all that stuff costs extra money. Printing lyrics, because you have to print your own lyrics, you have to go through the publishing company. Most of their, not all of them, Freedom of Choice and New Traditionalists do not print the lyrics, which I'm going to get to because there's some confusing stuff in those. They were willing to do all that stuff, and a lot of the things that they did on tour, they paid for. Anything that they made through the music got put back into the band.
I love that.
Their philosophy was the other thing that really intrigued me.
Your ideas are intriguing to me, and I wish to subscribe to your newsletter.
Is something that I never quite understood until decades later when the internet came around. But you could sort of suss out bits and pieces of it. So songs like Jocko Homo, for sure, Mongoloid from the first album, Gates of Steel on Freedom of Choice have these strange references to apes and evolution and de-evolution. And as a kid growing up in a Christian home, I understood the concept of evolution. So de-evolution, I could kind of figure out, okay, well then that means like we're turning back into apes. It was frustrating because on the first album, Are We Not Men, We Are Devo, the song Jocko Homo, which means ape man, supposedly, there's a bridge section of the song that the lyrics are not printed for. So I would sit there and just be like, well, what are they talking about? They're talking about apes, but I can't make out a lot of what he's saying. It's kind of rapid fire singing, and then they go back into the call and response, and it just never quite clicked with me. And same with Gates of Steel. That album didn't have the lyrics at all. And again, the bridge mentions apes. The ape regards his tail. Like, I could figure out that part. And I'm like, what is all this? And it's funny because when I was younger, I had caught onto this rumor that they were Mormon, and I don't know where it came from.
That's interesting.
And I don't know where I heard it, but my best friend, Ricky, who I've mentioned on the show, he was Mormon, and he had actually just moved back to, his family had moved back to Provo, Utah, and so we wrote letters while he was, shortly after he moved away for a while, and I remember writing that to him like, oh, hey, I heard that Devo were Mormon. And I had just mentioned to you that we had cleared out our rafters, and I found those notes, and the one on top was his response was like, yeah, I don't think they're Mormon. But later on, I found out that they used to open for themselves as Dove, the Band of Love, which was a spoof of an evangelical group. And I'm like, maybe that's where it tumbled down from. And I somehow, like the game of telephone, it came down to this, they're religious in some way, which is totally not the case at all.
Oh my God, I think that is so brilliant that they would open up for themselves as a different band. I've never heard of such a thing. How did I not know that they were doing that? That's really friggin' cool and hilarious.
Yeah, I believe there's a full performance on YouTube. You can look up.
I'm gonna look that up.
Dove, the Band of Love.
I love that so much. That makes me happy. I mean, the idea when a band takes what they do so seriously that they create a world around themselves, and they adhere to it strictly, but they're not too serious about it. They're able to take the philosophy and use a little bit of humor in there and mess with these larger ideas of the human dilemma, and mess with the audience too. I mean, the idea of having a fake band open up for you that's actually you is very, very Andy Kaufman-esque.
Yeah. And he comes up in some interviews, and mostly from the interviewers, but you hit on something that comes up a lot with them and has come up in the reading that I've done, as an adult about them, that serious but not serious.
Yes.
And it's something that really frustrated audiences and critics about them, that they're spouting all this philosophy, but are they taking it seriously or are they not? Part of their thing was railing against corporate America, which includes record companies.
Yep.
And from their earliest video compilations, they would always have skits about big music and this character named Rod Reuter and how he was like this sleazy A&R guy or PR guy or whatever, trying to get them to do all this stuff. Yet they're in the game.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, what, and they are conscious of that, and they say, well, what else do you do if you're a band? Because they didn't start out necessarily to become a band. They were art students at Kent State in the early 70s and would see each other's stuff around campus, and then finally met Jerry and Mark, the leads of the group, Jerry Casale and Mark Mothersbaugh, and liked what each other was doing. And so they started doing stuff together, stuff like stickers and not graffiti necessarily, but things that would get posted around campus that one or the other would see. And so then they started doing that stuff together, and they were both musical and had been taught, music growing up, and that just sort of became a part of the bigger whole. And then the shootings at Kent State happened, and Jerry Casale was there, and two of the people that were murdered by the National Guard were friends of his.
Wow.
And that became the impetus of the group and of them starting to perform, and this anger that came out, and the philosophy of de-evolution, which they took from this book called The Beginning Was the End, which had come out in 1971, that put forth this ridiculous theory that we're descended from brain-eating apes. These different lines of apes would battle, and the ones that would win would eat the other apes' brains, and this, therefore, eating brains, as we all know, makes you smarter. And so their brains were growing and growing too much and causing pain in their skulls, and it led to like a larger sex drive and the loss of natural ESP and all this other goofy stuff. So that was one of the things that, as I say, when I listen to Jocko Homo or Gates of Steel, these references to apes and
that's
Spud Boys and potatoes and all this other weird stuff, and they're always singing about themselves, the name of the band's in the music a lot, which you don't normally hear. And then the Jocko Homo thing comes from an anti-evolution religious tract called Jocko Homo Heaven Bound that was published in the 1920s, back around the Scopes trial. And, everybody taking that idea of we descended from apes as opposed to coming from a common ancestor.
Right.
We didn't come from no ape. God made man. And so that's where part of that Jocko Homo bridge comes from. So those ideas being put forth like that, and the idea of where we are as a society, even back in the 70s, when I read a lot of the interviews and stuff, I'm like, well, nothing's changed. It's only getting worse. And I think we'll get to later is that's sort of why they came back as strongly as they did, because those ideas are more prevalent now, that we're regressing as a society.
That's what they're predicting in the early 80s when they emerge on the scene in response to everything that's going around them. That's the punk aspect of Devo. It's like this part of humanity is fucked up. In fact, basically we're regressing on a daily basis. And the idea of, this, I love that you brought up the concept of the brain eating apes, because it's like, I feel like we're just a few steps away from absurd concepts like this reemerging and us glomming onto them, or factions of us glomming onto them. Not only does what you're talking about right now with Devo and the origin of the band and what drove them and what their rebellion was all about relate directly to what I'm going to be talking about today, but also I just discovered this other newer band called Viagra Boys. They're from Sweden. Their commentary about contemporary society is very similar. They have a song called Troglodyte, which is about this kind of regression in human behavior and wanting to go out there and kill and not understand. The whole album that song is on is about how complicated and unfortunate the world is for not believing in certain ideas that certain factions have come up with, like fears of vaccines and stuff like this.
Flat Earth.
The flat Earth.
That's a regression. Talk about a regression.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
A regression.
I mean, it's insane. So this kind of Devo is, and I know you're going to talk about it in a little bit, but I feel like the time for Devo was then, but it's still now. And how wonderful for the band, but and for what the band represents in a way, because that means people are listening to them still and again, and maybe new listeners too. But also, what does that say about us? That's a whole other conversation.
You mentioned the 80s, but this was even before that, because a lot of what was they're talking about is the Vietnam War, Nixon, this idea that people would rather be told what to do than to figure stuff out for themselves.
Right. Yeah.
It's easier to just go, oh, okay, and that's what the song Freedom of Choice is about, which does come out in 1980, but the seeds of that were already there. And that idea that as they are protesting Nixon going into Cambodia, that's what the Kent State thing was about. That's what they were resisting against. And to be shot and have 4 people killed because of that is backwards. A lot of that stuff, I didn't know about them until years later. I didn't know that they were at Kent State at that time. I knew about Kent State. I didn't know that they were there at the same time.
Right.
I didn't know that was an inciting factor to create the project.
Once they hit the radio, you don't know what the catalyst for them.
Yeah, I mean, nobody would know.
You don't know that.
Even at the release of their first album, you wouldn't know. It's not political in that way of Creedence Clearwater Revival or some of the other 60s bands who have protest songs. Theirs are more about people, like Mongoloid.
Yeah.
It's not about people with Down syndrome. It's about a guy who's just a normal guy. He just toes the line and goes to work every day, brings home the bacon. It's about working a 9-to-5 job, and all that stuff was interesting to me.
Yeah.
There is a song, Too Much Paranoia, is on the first album that talks about Big Macs, and it has part of the Burger King jingle from back then in the song, and I knew that song, and so that was like, why are they singing this Burger King jingle? But they did stuff like that, and they incorporated things, and they took stuff, which is I'll get to later on, as part of their aesthetic as well. A lot of the symbols and little images that would pop up on all the albums that I couldn't explain, didn't know what it was in reference to, but was fascinating. When I got those first 3 albums, that was 1981, I only had like 6 months or so to wait for the next album, because they released between 78 and 82, they released an album every year, right around the same time of the year too, usually in the fall. So New Traditionalists came out, again, interesting cover. Now they've got these plastic pompadour hairdos.
Oh yeah.
Different kind of outfit, totally into that look, into the vibe of the album itself. And it's not as good as Freedom of Choice, but it was still solid. So I was like, oh man, 3 out of 4 ain't bad. Barely listened to Duty Now for the Future. And then the next year, Oh No, It's Devo came out, and I was still very much interested, but that was sort of the cutoff point for me because the album was not nearly as good. They were really straying away from any kind of rock sound, because there was always a strong rock sound still, because Bob, Mark's brother, Bob Mothersbaugh, strictly played guitar, so there was always guitar in there. Right. As much synthesizer as there was always a strong guitar sound. It's virtually gone from Oh No, It's Devo, and then after that it's just all, and it's not even really Moog synthesizers from then on. It's just like, it sounds like Casio. They were using the Fairlight, but it becomes uninspired and uninteresting music to me at that point. And the only other thing that really came about from that is that they appeared on a show called Square Pegs shortly after the album was released. And Square Pegs is a show that I watched and enjoyed a lot. back then. Very new wave, kids. Sarah Jessica Parker was on it, one of her early roles. And so they were going to be on, and I was super excited. And I want to say there was something happened locally here that made it not play. Like, it was playing, but then there was an emergency alert thing or something happened, because I remember I didn't see it for a while. I think I had to catch it on repeat later on. I remember being really disappointed that I didn't catch it. So that's sort of where, at that point in 82, I didn't really pay attention to what they were doing after that. Came back to stuff years later, which is what I'll get to in the second part. When I told you what I was going to do, you had offered up one thing, which I'm sure you'll do at some point. I was like, oh, we're both going to do music. That's great. And then you changed it. And when changed it, I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. These work well together.
Ape has never killed ape, let alone an ape child.
In the spirit of de-evolution,
or re-evolution, and, you know, subversive commentary on the problems of the human race, I know you and I share a deep respect for and appreciation of the Planet of the Apes movies, the original films.
Beware the beast man, for he is the devil's pawn. Alone among God's primates, he kills for sport or lust or greed.
I mean, I'm going to talk about this a little bit, but I also love the television series, which is essentially the same episode, just on repeat. Yeah, I threw out Planet of the Apes, and you were like, that's perfect. That makes so much sense, because we're essentially talking about, or we're both going to be addressing this concept of the complications of the concept of de-evolution from, or evolving from apes, or evolving back into apes, and we're all troglodyte-minded, essentially. And so, yeah, Planet of the Apes. Now, my first experience with Planet of the Apes was seeing images or advertisements in catalogs or magazines. It was part of, you know, I would see an image of Cornelius or General Ursus. I can't even identify where I first saw these images, but it became like, oh, that's just something that exists out there, until I was visiting a family member's house and the television series was on. So I never saw the original Planet of the Apes film until I made the decision to see it as a young adult. I was probably 16 or something like that. I saw the television series at a relative's house, and I was just immediately drawn in. There was something about the terrifying gorillas. It just terrified me as a young kid. You've talked about this before in other, maybe it was, I'm pretty sure it was the Wake Up Heavy episode. You talked about Midsommar, correct? Or was that with another?
I've talked about it with Cleo. Briefly, we watched it.
That's what it was. It was a more recent episode of you and Cleo talking about Midsommar, and the day horror, or horror that takes place in the middle of the day in the sun, was what drew me into Planet of the Apes at first. Those scenes in the television show, it's very dry. The landscape is California, dry, grassy fields, and locations are very similar to the foothills around here in Central California. And most of the scenes are taking place in the middle of the day, apes against humans, or apes against apes, or humans against humans. There's something about that kind of terrifying experience happening in the middle of the day that really moved me. And it probably moved me because you and I live in an area where the summers are dry and bright and oppressive. So you combine that with this imagery of ape people, and it really stuck with me. When I finally got around to seeing the original Planet of the Apes film, already having had some experience with the Twilight Zone and that kind of storytelling, the Rod Serling written script really struck a chord with me. The music is perfect, the right word. Soundtracks to films really, really matter. And I think if a film takes that aspect seriously, it shows and it lasts. And the soundtrack, the way the film looks, Charlton Heston's over the top performance. This is something that that I can't quite understand. You have this very, at the time, 1968, when the first film comes out, the special effects makeup is like cutting edge, But you look at that now, or if I, when I looked at it when I was 15, 16, and then when I was younger watching it, when I was younger, I was just like taken in by it immediately. It's convincing, but watching it as a teen, I was like, and a teen who's obsessed with special effects makeup, like, it's not good. It's not good makeup.
Really? You don't think so? I still am convinced by it. And I just watched the 4 sequels the other day, or the last couple of weeks.
So you're touching on exactly where I'm headed with this. It's the makeup techniques are archaic, but there's something that's convincing. I can't quite put my finger on it. It's the acting. I mean, there are moments when they are talking, or they're in the characters are having emotional moments, or yelling, or exasperated, where they're blowing the cheeks out, and you can see the teeth of the human inside of the mouth of the ape. And this is the part that's perplexing to me, and I need contemporary filmmakers to look at this, and I know that some of them are, but maybe not all of them. And we're going to talk about the newer Planet of the Apes movies in a little bit. There is something utterly convincing about this makeup that looks like somebody who knows how to create special effects makeup, but this is done by somebody who's maybe still learning, or the special effects makeup hasn't evolved. The use of foam latex hasn't become what it became in the 80s, and it's not great, but utterly convincing. Absolutely, I'm watching these apes talk to one another. Their mouths aren't moving the way around the words the way they should, but the acting is there. It's such an amazing experience. And to this day, every single time I watch any of those first films, what is there? 5 of them, plus the television show, I am absolutely drawn in. It's not just so it's not about what we see on the surface, right? It's about the acting. It's about the storytelling. And these films are addressing serious issues. The first one's about the fear of nuclear disaster. I mean, the second one, where you discover these mutant humans living under the surface that worship the nuclear bomb.
Glory be to the bomb and to the holy fallout, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
That's amazing. And then you get into Escape from Planet of the Apes, where Zira and Cornelius go back in time to this like corrupt human, world, and they're at first they're taken in, and then they're treated horribly, and then they're killed. I mean, it's like, this is amazing storytelling, and the terror is all in the daytime. It is all right out in front of you. There's no mysterious monster, CGI monster in the shadows here. This is all in your face, plastic monkey faces, and it's all convincing. And it gets even more complicated and interesting because Cornelius and Zira's son Caesar becomes the leader of the new world, and then it all becomes this cyclical thing where we're all products of ourselves, and I love that. And by the end of the run of those first 5 films, we're back in the era of, or close to back in the era when Charlton Heston shows up, right? But
are we?
The human race.
It's like the 90s.
Yeah, the human.
in the last one.
Yeah, the human race has already made their huge mistakes, and the ape civilization is becoming the more integral or powerful civilization. There's still quite a bit of time between that and
a lot of time.
Yeah.
From what I remember, it's like 3755, the year that they land on the Planet of the Apes in the first film. And basically when Zira and Cornelius go back in 1973 or 72 or whatever. I got one thing, the Serling script you mentioned, and I in the past and recently, because I knew you were doing this, I have looked up what his involvement was. And I don't think much of his script actually survived.
That doesn't surprise me.
He went with how the book was presented, and I don't know if you've ever read the source novel.
Yeah, I'm going to get into that.
Where it's very much a futuristic society.
It is, yeah. Yeah, there's modern technology in that book.
And I thought, it's kind of smart that they didn't go that route, because I think the end that at least they go with in the movie, or maybe the surprise that this is Earth, wouldn't play out as strongly as it does. Because why would they have like TV? Why would they have the same technology as what you had left, basically? And I know they did it for cost reasons, but that's one thing that always flummoxed me when I watched the movies was, okay, that this is the future and they're advanced apes, but the only real technology they have is guns.
Yeah, it's strange.
They have no there's no electricity, there's no anything motorized in this
society.
Can
make bullets. They can make
bullets.
Got
guns.
And so when I read the book, I was 24, 23, 24, and you and I kind of have always come together on this. It's like the Planet of the Apes imagery, the Mego figures, like everything that Planet of the Apes represents comes back heavily, I know, for both of us. We both are very attracted to the art of the Planet of the Apes. And so when I was about 24, I guess, I was getting back into it. I bought all the movies, and they were kind of, the films were being re-released, I think, on DVD, and I bought the television series. I don't remember when all that became available again. But then I read the book. I ordered the book, and I read the book, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I see what the author Pierre Boulle was saying, and why someone would want to turn that into a film." But there's part of me that kind of prefers, even though it's weird that the only technology that exists is the guns, I kind of prefer the storyline of the first film over the book. But it's, the same system exists. The orangutans are the politicians, the chimpanzees are the scientists, the gorillas are the officers, and the humans are the de-evolved, speechless creatures, enslaved creatures that are in the first film.
You mentioned some of the heavy stuff that gets brought up in these films, and slavery and race relations are another thing. Were very big in 1968.
Yeah, exactly. And conquest of and escape from and conquest of are deep civil rights films. They're really powerful representations of what we were thinking about, what we should have been thinking about, how we were treating each other. And this is, by the time those movies come out, it's 71 and 70. I got the dates here, 71 and 72. In rewatching them, about every 8 years or so, I'll rewatch them. And every time I rewatch them, and I know you recently rewatched these films too with Cleo, every time I rewatch them, I'm reminded of how slow our progress has been as human beings. We are problematic creatures, and we are slow learners. We straight up forget. I mean, that's how problematic we are. We forget about the mistakes we've made. And I just ask that modern politicians should be watching the original Planet of the Apes films.
They wouldn't get it. They wouldn't get it.
How hard is it?
They wouldn't get it. They wouldn't get it.
It's how hard
they wouldn't
is it
get the message, Ronnie.
I'm not, but here's the deal. I'm not very smart. I get the message, right? And so
they'd be on the side of the politicians in the movie. Yeah, take the apes out. That ape can't survive.
We can't. It's the
Caesar can't survive, or Milo, as he's called.
Fear wins. Fear always wins. Like human beings, they just.
It's the same message that Devo was presenting. It's
exactly
the same message.
Yeah, it's easier to just give in to your fear and eliminate the scary and try to move on with blinders on. That's what Devo is talking about. In fact, that's what a lot of bands in the late 70s and early 80s, punk bands that were talking about society as a dystopian dilemma. A snake eating its own tail. There's no escape. I mean, a lot of these problems are in science fiction. They're in our music, and yet it's hard for us to see all that and listen to it. I mean, for a band like Viagra Boys to be talking about the same problems that are in Planet of the Apes and are in the lyrics of Devo songs. And Viagra Boys have only been around for like 5 years or something like that. It's like for them to be making that same commentary today. I mean, I'm happy those songs exist because Viagra Boys is a great band, but it's so disappointing that these are the same issues that we've been battling. It makes for good art, but it's also sad, you know? But yeah, I have more to talk about regarding Planet of the Apes and my obsession with the aesthetic of Planet of the Apes, which we'll get to in a little bit here.
I saw the movies on TV over the years. They played constantly on Channel 26. And I know at one point, probably when I was in my later teens, I remember seeing... I don't know if they played all 5, but they played most of them like one day. They would do that every once in a while on 26 where it was just Planet of the Apes. And that was probably the first time that I had seen all of the sequels and found the ideas of the sequels actually a little more interesting. Coming back, how it becomes, like you say, cyclical, where now, was this the original instigating thing? That they come back and then all this starts, and then there's the disease, the plague that kills off all the dogs and cats, and they become chattel, and it's very intriguing ideas. Maybe not presented, not that they're campy, but I think the budgets decreased as the series went on. So I know on the second one, most of the apes in the background are just wearing masks, like latex masks, which is fine. I've never really considered the makeup anything other than amazing. Yes, you can see their teeth sometimes and the mouths don't move. They're acting with their eyes for the most part.
That's exactly it. That's why it works. The acting.
That's how you get the emotion, because otherwise it's just layers and layers of latex.
Yep.
It's that design that struck me. It's that design that when I saw the Mego figures in the store, I was like, I'll get into this in a later episode someday, but like, why did I never have those?
Yeah.
Because I loved them. And the head sculpts on those just took hold. I don't know, because I know I saw them in stores. I saw them at Long's Drugs.
Yeah.
And never got them.
General Ursus, in particular, he doesn't show up until the second film, but there's a version of guerrilla officers in the first one, but his image, I don't know if I saw him in the back pages of comic books or if I saw him somewhere, but his visage was deeply intriguing to me. I've always been fascinated by gorillas, but there's something about General Ursus in particular that just really I just love. Yeah, exactly. Mark is showing me right now the Mego Ursus, the recent Mego Ursus, and it's just special. The costume design, the structure of the appliances on
their clothes even, and his helmet.
His helmet,
fascinating.
The makeup, the helmet, the fur, and it's all good. And it really comes down to the expression of the eyes of the actors too.
I think they make a big mistake in the second movie though by showing a couple of them in a sauna so that they're in big hairy suits,
gorilla suits. Yeah,
that is a questionable effect. I'll give you that.
Yeah, there are a lot of those kind of mistakes in the films, and when you have a lower budget, and the budget, as you said, I was looking at the budgets last night, and I was like, oh yeah, it really decreases substantially. But also, those later films rely more on storytelling. I mean, that's right there at the very beginning, to be honest with you. But it does sort of become more about the commentary or the storyline than it does about the special effects as the films progress. But yeah, General Ursus, man, and I can't put my finger on where I first saw his face, but definitely I can probably just say it was comic books somewhere in the back.
Well, they did have, I think Marvel had a Planet of the Apes series.
That's true, they did.
I don't remember. I know I saw a couple episodes of the show, and then there was the cartoon as well, but
oh yeah, the cartoon.
I didn't really watch them or catch them on a regular basis. I didn't watch the old series with Cleo, just the new one, which we can talk about later, but because I've put it to her a number of times, like, hey, let's watch the Planet of the Apes films.
Oh, you were watching the new series. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, no, I watched all 4 of the sequels. I didn't watch the first one again because I'm pretty sure I saw it. TCM plays it all the time, and I watched it recently, and she's seen most of the first one, and I'm like, there's 4 more. She has expressed zero interest in. But maybe now that we've watched the new series, we'll go back and watch those.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, I got more to say about the new series.
And we shall build our own cities in which there will be no place for humans except to serve our ends. And we shall found our own armies, our own religion, our own dynasty. And that day is upon you now!
Hello. This is Devo.
What's next for you?
Well, like I mentioned, I became less interested in the new stuff after the disappointment of Oh No, It's Devo.
Mm-hmm.
By this time, I'm going to the record store, if not warehouse in Fashion Fair.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe I'm hitting the old Tower Records from time to time with my sister. And I'd always go over there and look.
Yeah.
Under D and see what was happening. So I remember seeing the cover for their next album, Shout, and I don't even know if I've heard any songs off that album, to be honest with you. I would see the one after that, Smooth Noodle Maps, which I believe was their last. By that time, the drummer had left because they were basically replacing him with drum machine,
right,
and electronic drums, and he was like, I think that's one regret that they have, especially Gerald Casale, because anytime they talk about Alan Myers, who passed away, I think in 2013, they're like, you know, he was amazing. He was the human metronome, and we blew it by replacing him with electronic drums. And then I would see they would do, as Warner Brothers or any other record company likes to do with back catalogs, is release compilations. So they released Devo's greatest hits, Devo's greatest misses, and I would see all that stuff and look at it. There would be live albums. There was one called Now It Can Be Told, which used an image, which I didn't know at the time, from the cover of that book, The Beginning Was the End, that talks about the brain-eating apes. And I saw that. It's a live album, and I'm like, whoa, what is this image? They were still kind of capturing me with stuff. I still had my albums, which I do to this day, and I would listen to them every once in a while because I had a dingy little record player.
Mm-hmm.
I remember like when the hardcore Devo volumes came out, they had really kind of graphic covers for the time, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what that meant. And now I know that it was early stuff, demos and things that they had recorded pre-first album. Mm-hmm. And just I never bought anything. The only thing I bought, and I don't remember when I got this, was a little EP cassette of Devo Live from their 1980 tour, and it has like, I think 6 songs on it. And the version of Planet Earth that's on this, they changed the lyrics, and I found out later on that they would do this in most cities. They would gear it toward the city that they were performing in, but they were kind of naughty lyrics. So the song on the album is pretty straightforward, and Jerry sings it on the album. Mark sings it in concert for whatever reason. But they're in San Francisco, so they say something like, I knew a girl from San Francisco whose boyfriend ate her whole, and stuff like that. And then there's another version on the live DVD that I got later where they're in Petaluma, so they rhyme something raunchy with Petaluma. And I just remember thinking, oh, this is interesting. They're naughty,
provocative.
Too. Yeah. I've told this story before, but on Wake Up Heavy in reference to Motel Hell and seeing the commercial for that. And I always think that these happened on the same day. But at my grandparents' house in Visalia, we would go quite often because my dad had his nursery side business stuff out there. And I was taking a break, and I caught a preview of a Devo video that I didn't know anything about. And this was obviously in like 80, 81, 82, where they're dressed up. They've got these weird masks. Talk about masks. They were really into masks and wore them while performing regularly. They had these weird alien-esque masks on and some kind of weird red fabric or yellow fabric with Devo, DE/VO, since there's 5 of them. And it always looked like they were floating over like flames and fire. I thought, like they're in hell or something.
Yeah.
I didn't get to see what it was. I had to go back outside and work again or whatever. So years later, I want to say this was at my friend Staven's house, rented one of their numerous video compilations because it seemed like they just re-released them constantly when there would be new videos to add to it. So this was probably the complete truth about De-Evolution, which included all the stuff that they had done before they had a record contract, before anything. They were making videos before MTV was a thing.
I love that.
Other bands were doing stuff like that. There were promo videos. I don't know who they showed them to, but they were late night thing like Night Flight and other places that would show videos. So it would basically go in chronological order from that earliest stuff that was basically demo recordings that they made videos for, all the way up to whatever the most recent thing was. Dr. Detroit, their theme from Dr. Detroit, which is another one that's never really appealed to me. And I finally saw the Freedom of Choice video, and I'm like, oh, that's what that's from.
Freedom of choice is what you got. Freedom from choice is what you want.
There's all these professional skateboarders in it, and a lot of their videos are kind of cheesy, and of course, other than Whip It, most of them are shot on video, so they've got that very dated look. I was like, oh, that's where that's from. But it brought up another weird connection that is kind of mind-boggling to me still. They were in Neil Young's film Human Highway.
What?
And I'm like, why? What's the connection between them and Neil Young? And I guess he was just one of those guys that really enjoyed what they were putting out there.
Wow.
That's how they got their first album produced by Brian Eno, because David Bowie had seen them and was a huge fan. He was going to produce their first album. It didn't work out. He had to do others. Kind of glad he didn't. Whenever I think of that, I think of Transformer from Lou Reed and how that sounds so much like a Lou Reed, like a David Bowie album.
Yep.
I guess Neil Young just liked what they were doing. I found out years later that Rust Never Sleeps he actually took from them. They created that slogan for Rust-Oleum back in their Akron days when they weren't. So that was one of their side gigs, was doing advertising stuff. And they had like a little print shop, and they did rubber stamps and all this stuff, and they created that slogan. And then Neil Young's like, hey, can I use that? And they're like, yeah, whatever.
That's cool. That's amazing.
I've never made that connection. I still have yet to see Human Highway. I've seen bits and pieces of it. I've seen their performances in it. I've heard it's not very good.
That's amazing.
So then modern era, Facebook rolls around. I'm on there. I, find the stuff that I like. And I believe it was probably Devo Obsesso first, who I found on there before Devo had an actual presence on Facebook. So then I'd kind of find out about newer stuff, and at some point realized, there's this live DVD out from 1980. I bought that. It's really, really good performance. And on that were a lot of the songs from that second album that never really clicked with me. Hearing and seeing them performed live, I'm like, these are great songs. Years later, with further reading, realized it was the mix. They never liked the mix. The producer, they had practiced all this stuff to where they could perform it live. And during the recording, he had them record all their parts separately. So that was part of it. So they lose that vibe of the live performance playing together in a studio. And also the mix is very strange, and it's just kind of dull, and the guitars are always low in the mix, and they really work great live. And so I was pursuing other stuff, and I bought this early video compilation called The Men Who Make the Music. I kept seeing that one pop up, and it had, according to what I was reading online, the full performance, or the full film. In the beginning was the end, The Truth About De-Evolution, which had been the stills that were on the first album. I'm like, I need to get that, because I want to see that in total. So I bought a VHS off eBay. I think it was still shrink wrapped and in great condition, and played it and got to see that. And there's a bunch of other live performances from around the time of the second album, which showed me again how good these songs are live. So I enjoy the second album now a lot more than I did as a kid. Still, some of the songs are not really favorites, but and then in, I think, 2009, so they had performed at Coachella and Lollapalooza and stuff in the late 90s, early 2000s, and were kind of on that comeback swing already. So they re-released the first and the third albums, which are my favorites, in this deluxe edition with 2 CDs of the albums, and then a live show and a shorter DVD of the videos from those 2 albums. So I bought that. It came with a poster. It came with a little 45 of, I think, Jocko Homo and Satisfaction. And then shortly thereafter, they released the second and the fourth albums, but not combined, just as remasters. And I bought those. And so it was kind of like, I'm back. I'm back into this. I didn't really listen to them because I only had the albums. I never had tapes when my car just had a tape player. And so now I could listen to the CDs again, or put them on my phone at some point. And because of Facebook, and Michael Pilmer and Devo Obsesso, I'd found out, they do this convention pretty much every year called a devotional, where fans go out to, I believe, Ohio or maybe Virginia, where he lives. I think he's in Virginia. And for 1 year, for the first 200 people that bought tickets, they were going to give them a Turkey Monkey bank.
Yep.
And so I remember seeing that and going, wow, that's the cool, obviously I'm not flying to Akron to go to this thing just so I can get a but Turkey Monkey is one of those images that's on the inner sleeves of the albums and on other promotional stuff throughout the years that always really intrigued me. And I thought for a long time that it was I knew it was a collage. I thought it was a collage of a little monkey face inside of a key fob. Those
Oh, yeah.
The kind of fake, well, they may be real leather ones, but they're sort of circular on top, and they're got stitching all around it.
They're kind of shaped like a light bulb. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So I thought it was that with a little monkey face on it over an image of a turkey. And it's not. I found out, again, years later, because of the internet or because of the books I had bought, that it's an image of one of the monkeys that was sent into space. And it's the monkey's spacesuit that's around his head, and his little head's poking out. And so Mark Mothersbaugh took that image from Time magazine and pasted it on top of a turkey lacer package that you just buy at this. You can still buy them. I've looked them up. So it's got an image of a turkey, and it's got the metal things that you poke through with the string on them. And so that he had mashed those two together and created this turkey monkey image. And so whenever I got heavy into it again in like 2020, 2021, I remembered that turkey monkey thing, and I contacted Devo Obsesso about it. I was like, this never came out in a regular edition because it was supposed to have, do you have any information on that? And he's like, yeah, no, it's one of those things that may or may not ever happen. I'm like, well, if you have any extras, man, I'd really love to get one. So he did. Cool. And I got one, and I think it might be one of the greatest things I've ever owned in my entire life.
I remember when you got that and you showed that to me, I was like, that is phenomenal.
It's an amazing sculpt that hits the image like exactly, and then converts it, because you don't see the back of the monkey or the turkey on the image, but they really killed it on that.
It's so cool.
And if, gun to my head, I had to pick 5 things of mine, or I could never see my family again, I'd miss them a great deal. But no. If I had to pick 5 things and the rest were going to burn in a house fire, this would be one of the things that I would keep.
Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. It's just, somebody tried to buy it off me recently, and I was like, nope.
Yeah, don't get rid of that.
Got big dollars. And I'm like, nope.
You went through a lot to get that. I mean, not only is it something that resonates with you because you like Devo, but it's also the process of finding one and getting it, and the conversations around it and everything. Like that's something, that's a real investment. It's one of those things you put in your the house is on fire bag of things to grab.
Yeah. It really is. I mean, I would definitely try and grab it if I could.
Yeah.
It's just so bizarre, and that it got turned into a piece of plastic.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And it worked, his teeth are slightly open, so you can shove your coins in there, and it works as a coin bank, and it's amazing. And definitely I'll be using that image for promo stuff for this episode, so people know what the heck I'm talking about.
That's right.
I mentioned earlier hearing about the documentary that's coming out, or that came out, premiered at Sundance. So during this time, well, previous to the pandemic, and maybe even all the way back to like when these deluxe editions of the albums came out, there was supposed to be a documentary coming soon. And I saw like the Kickstarter campaign on Facebook, and didn't contribute to it because I never quite trust those things, and was really excited about that. And I think that kind of got me down the path of like trying to find books and other things that I could get to clear up some of this information that had always intrigued me as a kid that I never fully understood. And so I think I followed them on Facebook as well. They had their own page, and people are always bugging them, when's this coming out, what's the update, what's the news. Basically forgot about it after a while. I think it was supposed to be called Are We Not Men?
That's a good name for this episode.
Yeah, well, I have a better name, but
okay.
That does work too. We'll talk about it. So at some point, the last thing I had seen, and this was probably before I talked to Michael Pilmer, it had been squashed basically And here, this is anecdotal. This is rumor that Mark Mothersbaugh was stopping it from being released.
Oh, interesting.
They have that posted on their IMDb page for the movie, or somebody has posted it in the trivia.
Yeah.
So when I had seen this news, I'm like, oh, is that what this is? Did they clear it up, or did they finally get rid of the parts that he didn't like, or I don't know what? Right. No idea. It's all speculation. Apparently, it's not the same documentary. So this documentary is just called Devo, and it's directed by Chris Smith. And that name might not ring a bell right off the top of your head because
it sounds...
I just mixed two metaphors there. He is the director of American Movie.
Oh, God.
It's pronounced Coven, man. What else could it be pronounced?
Coven. That's the proper pronunciation.
No. Coven, no. Coven sounds like oven, man, and that's just, it doesn't work.
Yes, all right.
So,
I'm on board.
He also was involved in that Tiger King show on Netflix, which I know.
Oh, yeah. That was pretty good. I watched it.
Yeah, a couple other pretty well-regarded documentaries.
Yeah.
So I was like, ooh, cool. That bumps my interest up. So then I started, the reviews from Sundance started coming out. So I was reading those. I'm like, okay, I'm seeing good stuff. And then the last one I read kind of put a little bit of a damper on that because apparently it's just them. There are no talking heads in the film other than the surviving band members. And I'm like, that's really odd.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you not talk to like the members of Blondie, who they've always had a really nice relationship with, and I know that they're friendly with, and Chris Stein from Blondie has taken dozens and dozens of pictures of them over the decades. I mean, he took pictures when they performed together all the way to currently. Why would you not talk to them? Why would you not talk to the producers of the albums?
Right.
Why would you not talk to contemporaries? And so I find that really odd because I've seen interviews with them as I go down that rabbit hole, and they're available on YouTube, and they're interesting, but they all kind of end up being the same.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about the Kent State stuff. They talk about the album stuff. They talk about the problem with, Warner Brothers. They talk about the dissolution of the band. They talk about the coming back. If it's just going to be more of that, it's probably not going to present anything really new or enlightening to people that already follow the band. So that's disappointing.
Yeah.
But will I watch it still? Of course.
Yeah, I'm going to watch it. Maybe they've decided to do it that way so that there aren't people interpreting what they've done, and they're more telling their story as if it's autobiographical. So it's an interesting approach.
Yeah, but that becomes, that's what this book is that I have that I mentioned earlier. It's just them. It's Mark, Bob, and Jerry, the three surviving band members, talking about stuff. Mostly Mark and Jerry, mostly Jerry.
Yeah.
And it's like, I've heard all this.
Yeah.
And the old interviews say a lot of what the new interviews say. And I don't know. It seems odd to me. That seems a little too self-contained.
Yeah, I agree. And that's actually the problem with a lot of autobiographies anyways. If it's too self-contained, you're telling your own story, how invested is the person writing their autobiography in perspective taking? They could have talked to Tony Basil, who Jerry dated for a while and worked on some of their videos. So it's just like, really? They have connections. Talk to Neil Young. Why was he interested? Instead of Jerry telling me why they connected with Neil Young, I want Neil Young to tell me why they connected. There you go. Yeah. Go straight to the source.
I don't need to hear about the troubles of the first album recording with Brian Eno from them again. I've only ever heard it from them.
Yeah.
Or weird trips to see Richard Branson in Jamaica and smoking tons of weed, and him trying to get a record deal with them for, Europe, and heard that. I've read that story. I've heard that story dozens of times from them.
That's hilarious. Let's hear from Richard Branson. Let's hear Branson's interpretation of that experience.
The only other thing I haven't mentioned that was always intriguing to me was was Boogie Boy. And that's another bit of ephemera that I'd like to track down a piece of. And again, I would see the face, or I would see pictures of Mark Mothersbaugh in that mask, this little kind of cherubic, just generic kid face. But since he's so myopic, he'd always have glasses on over it. It's spelled Boojiboy, but it's Boogie Boy. Which as a kid I always mispronounced it, obviously, because the reason for that is that they created the lettering for it with Letraset, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah, definitely.
And they didn't have any G's, and they had used up all the E's. So they did J-I, but it's Boogie Boy. And so he's like their little human mascot that's weird, and he performs on some songs, performs a song from... what is it? It's one of the Japanese monster movies, but it's called The Words Get Stuck in My Throat, and he performs a version of that live, and it's just utterly bizarre and fascinating.
Love that. I'll be watching that too.
It is from the War of the Gargantuas. Here is Boogie Boy singing a snippet of it.
A bobblehead was released of him a number of years back. Wade Krause has one, which I should let him know that he can sell for about $500 on eBay right now. And there was a little figure, these Japanese figures, kind of like Kubricks or Bear Bricks, but they were called keys because they were a keychain. They released a little monkey in the yellow Tyvek hazmat suit with a Boogie Boy mask that fit over its head, and I have been trying to track one of those down on eBay for years.
That's cool.
That's my next goal, is to grab one of those at a not ridiculous price. But it, to relate again kind of to Planet of the Apes, that call and response of Are We Not Men, We Are Devo, which is in Jocko Homo, which is the title of their first album, comes from Island of Lost Souls, the first filmed iteration of the Island of Dr. Moreau, and that is something that they would chant. Are we not men? Not the We Are Devo part, obviously, but
and that's a movie too. Like, I mean, Island of Dr. Moreau is fantastic, and then we could have a whole conversation about the remake with Marlon Brando too.
I've never watched it.
I highly recommend you do. Not that you'll enjoy it. Not that you'll enjoy it. You probably won't enjoy it. It is
Life is too short to watch bad movies.
It is a piece of work. But there are parts of it that that's a whole other conversation.
I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I have seen The Island of Dr. Moreau, the 70s film with Michael York.
That's great, yeah.
I have not seen Island of Lost Souls, so I've caught bits and pieces of it on TCM. They show it every once in a while.
Yeah, it's very good.
Not seen the Are We Not Men part of that. The Jocko Homo stuff also appears in probably my favorite song from the second album, called Wiggly World, Off Duty Now for the Future. There are these rules, these contradictory rules laid out in that tract that they pull from, and all that stuff is just fascinating to me.
Oh, yeah.
That philosophy, the inspiration, that become the lyrics to these very strange songs, and sticking to that ideology through, most of your career. The latest album they did in 2010, is it Something for Everyone or Something for Everybody? I listened to, I think, most of it on iTunes, and it's pretty good. But what I have on my phone are the first 4 albums and the songs I like from Oh No, It's Devo, and some of the live stuff that came with those special editions, and that kind of works for me. Like, I don't need to expand. I love them. I pretty much listen to any song that comes on in my shuffle. I don't have to love all of Oh No, It's Devo. I don't really have to listen to anything on Shout or Smooth Noodle Maps or any of that stuff.
Yeah, I can totally identify with that. I as you know, Melvins are one of my favorite bands of all time. I have particular records of theirs albums of theirs that I believe are absolute perfection. and they're on rotation constantly for me. But I don't, they come out with an album every year pretty much, sometimes 2 albums a year. I can't commit to all that music, and not all of it rings the bell for me, so to speak. So yeah, I get it. But I'm a Melvin's devotee. Like I'm not to use devotee as a pun if we're talking about Devo, but but I am. I'm dedicated, and we don't, just because we're dedicated to someone or something, or this is a good transition, by the way, to the next half of my Planet of the Apes talk. Just because we like an IP or something doesn't mean we have to like all of it.
Yeah, I'm not a completist per se.
Yeah.
I am actually getting into, and there's a song that's going to open this because they used it. They use it on Instagram for a recent thing. They're promoting 2 different. They've got The Art of Devo and 50 Years of Devo, these compilations. And I think The Art of Devo kind of hits the same stuff as the Hardcore Devo, where it's early demos, early songs that weren't on any of the albums. And so the music they were using for that, I was like, ooh, what is that? And I found it on Hardcore Devo on iTunes, and like, this song is great.
Oh, there you go.
They've got some funky grooves going on in these early demos and stuff that kind of disappear. I didn't even talk about their cover of Satisfaction, which is just amazing, and how it's just so different from the original, and the way it was created was, I could go on and on about a lot of this stuff.
It's masterful.
And I just always assumed they kind of deconstructed the song, but I guess I'll get into it before we switch. I just recently kind of reread this and remembered it, that it happened because they were goofing around, and Alan Myers had started this drum beat. Bob One had started a little guitar riff, and just as a goof during rehearsal, and Mark Mothersbaugh started singing a different Rolling Stones song over the top of it. And then somebody was like, hey, do Satisfaction. They're not related in any way until the end of the song, and he actually plays the riff on his guitar. And if you want to find out about the guitar, that's another intriguing thing. Look up the I Can't Get No Satisfaction guitar, because he doesn't usually play guitar live, but when he does, it's got all the boxes.
Oh.
And that's one of the images on that first album.
Yeah.
Big image from the Satisfaction video. And I'm like, what are all those things all over his guitar?
Yeah.
They would all get custom guitars made, or they would cut guitars up. This is stuff I think you could appreciate, where, they would take the top half of a bass off and then sand it down and smooth it out and make it look like a custom bass. And
love it.
As this stuff pops into my head, I just want to keep going, but I won't. So,
well, that kind of creativity is always inspiring. Don't just. I was listening to, who was I listening to? Pretty iconic musician. The name's escaping me right now, but he was talking about how the band Morphine came up, in the 90s, and the lead singer reinvented the bass guitar. And at that time, that's something that we needed. If all you got to do to rethink how something is used is to just use your imagination and start fucking around with different string placements or putting electronic devices into your instrument, and Wayne Coyne
they did tons of that.
They did tons of that stuff, right? And this is
circuit bending and all this other stuff.
Yeah, Wayne Coyne's guitar from Flaming Lips, that's basically a theremin that's a guitar at the same time. This kind of creativity is great, and Devo is a great example of establishing. You've got this rule. Let's break it. You got this thing.
Right.
Let's change it. And I love that. That's inspiring.
That is very true.
The only good human is a dead human.
You know what they say. Human see, human do.
Planet of the Apes is similar to what we were talking about with Devo. You don't have to like everything, right? Melvin, same thing. You don't have to like everything. Planet of the Apes is still, for everybody listening to this, Planet of the Apes is still part of the conversation. There are movies continuously being made, but for a long time, there wasn't a lot of Planet of the Apes stuff out there besides the original films and some of the, and if you saw Amigo toy or something, some toy at an antique store or swap meet or something, and then the Tim Burton movie comes around and helps bring Planet of the Apes into the limelight again, so to speak. And in my opinion, interest in that franchise hasn't really died down since then. In fact, we've got a lot of new toys since then, and a ton of movies. A ton. What'd you say, 4?
Well, there's a new one coming out that'll be the 4th one.
Yeah. And not all of it's great. I mean, I know I talked about this when we were talking about Tim Burton in a previous episode. I think it was during one of our conversations. I went to go see Planet of the Apes by myself on the first day. Like the Tim Burton Planet of the Apes. I had to see it. I was so excited. I was ecstatic that in this time when computer animation was on the rise and at the forefront of box office hits, Tim Burton decided to go full-on traditional special effects makeup with these apes, human beings acting behind the makeup, just like the original films, but of course better makeup. And I was super excited. Watched the movie and was genuinely disappointed. It wasn't great. I mean, there were a lot of nice nods to the original films. It was a really interesting approach to the original storyline, a really interesting take. But when I say this, I mean it in full sincerity. I haven't watched that film since I saw it on DVD, so I've only seen it twice. And it just doesn't ring a bell for me. It just doesn't ring that bell for me. It doesn't make me happy in the way that the original films do. And then when I found out that they were re-releasing or that they were going to reimagine the story in the new series of films, I was excited. And again, I watched Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and then the second one, I believe, I don't remember. What's the second one called?
It was Rise of the Planet of the Apes, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and War for the Planet of the Apes.
So I saw Dawn of, and I saw Rise of, but I haven't seen War for, and I'm hesitant to see the newer one too that's coming out. But I'm intrigued though, because the new one that's coming out, it's almost like it's that cyclical thing that we were talking about. We're now in a place where the human beings are the de-evolved creatures, this de-evolved species, and that the apes are the dominant race. In fact, it seems to align a little bit with Battle for the Planet of the Apes. So I'm intrigued by that, because here we are going in that circle again. Though the technology and the computer animation is impressive, it still just doesn't grab me as much as the original films. And the original films, like we talked about previously today, like the special effects makeup, it's not fantastic.
It is fantastic.
When you compare the special effects makeup, as far as technical,
you're going to keep saying that, and I'm going to keep disagreeing, because I think it's fantastic.
What's funny, the terminology is different, but we are in agreement. The quality of artwork involved in making that original special effects makeup is nowhere near as the artistic effort of Rick Baker or a contemporary special effects makeup artist. The makeup in the Tim Burton film is spectacular in that the artistry had evolved to a point where you can actually see the facial expressions more of the actor underneath. Now, the reason why we are in agreement, in my opinion, is because nothing equals the power or the effort of the original films with the makeup, the acting underneath the makeup, the aesthetics of the original makeup, the way those faces looked. Nothing matches that. And you can bring in computer animation, you can bring in Rick Baker, you can do all these things to the newer movies, and nothing quite works as well as those original films. To me, if I'm going to watch the newer films, it's going to be for the interesting new take on the story, not for the special effects. When I watch the original films, I'm watching it to see those actors underneath that heavy makeup do masterful work. And I'm watching also for the storyline and for the music too. I mean, the music in all those films is just fantastic. To make a swift transition back to appreciating the original makeup design for these films, I'd much rather watch Hanging with Dr. Z than watch the new movies, because I don't know if anybody out there has watched Hanging with Dr. Z, but I highly recommend it. It's a YouTube show. Dana Gould is a comedian who's pretty darn smart. He'd written a few like Simpsons episodes, I believe. And he basically portrays Dr. Zaius, but Dr. Zaius is sort of he's involved in Hollywood.
Talk show host.
Yeah, well, he's a talk show host, but he talks about this a lot as a host, that he's involved with Hollywood, and knows the stars, and he is an ape basically acting in Hollywood. And he does part of the comedy there is he name drops a lot, and he spends a lot of time with famous actors outside of his talk show host time. But he's wearing the original makeup of Dr. Zaius, and it's awesome. It's hilarious, and it's tongue in cheek, but it's also like the level of appreciation for the original films is there, and I love it. And you and I were talking before we started today about how it can be a little bit much, and that's absolutely true. But every time a new episode pops up, I jump on it and I watch it, and it usually makes me feel real good. I want to take a moment and just talk a little bit about the toys, because you and I we have at least I do. I have a love-hate relationship with reaction figures. They're a little too expensive lately, but when there are figures, we're talking about the Super 7 line of action figures, reaction figures, which basically follow the same design aspects of vintage Kenner Star Wars action figures. Every once in a while, I'll go down a rabbit hole and drool over the Planet of the Apes reaction figures. And there's a play set and everything. I never got on board with buying those, but every once in a while I'll look at them and I'll think, oh man, I should try and get some of them. But
they're a draw for me too, and I passed on them.
Yeah, I keep
kind
passing.
of regretfully.
I know. We're planning a trip to San Francisco in May, and whenever we go to San Francisco, I swing by, we swing by the Super 7 store and just have a look at what's on the shelves. If there happens to be a regular priced Planet of the Apes figure on their shelf, I'm probably going to grab it. But they've done figures from most of the original films. So the weird mutant in Mutant Human, what's his name? Mendez in Beneath the Planet of the Apes. He's got that like raw pink veiny head.
It's like when the Simpsons turn inside out on that Treehouse of Horrors episode.
That's exactly it. That's exactly the look. So I'm tempted by that figure or that character, and you and I have enjoyed seeing the Mego re-releases.
I've gotten a bunch of them.
Yeah, I've gotten a few of them too.
Oh wait, no, I've only gotten 2 of them. That was one of the things I gave myself for Christmas a couple of years ago. Caesar and General Ursus.
I got Zaius and Ursus, and I have the Cornelius that you gave me. And
yeah,
Mego presents the Planet of the Apes action figures. Dr. Zaius, the orangutan scientist. Cornelius, the archaeologist.
It's nice to see those newer Megos, but they don't quite get there as far as being as beautiful as the vintage Mego Planet of the Apes figures.
They're pretty good though. The Caesar is basically Cornelius again.
Yeah,
he slightly different outfit.
Yeah.
So when I started back into Megos, however many years ago that was, a company called EMCE had been releasing the Star Trek figures and Planet of the Apes figures, basically straight Mego reproductions. And I got the Dr. Zaius of that.
Nice.
And I can't remember if my Cornelius, I think my Cornelius is an original. I like the new ones.
Yeah, they're good. I mean, it does the thing. It activates that feeling of nostalgia for me, and I'm a little bit younger than you. I didn't see those figures in the stores growing up. Maybe a few of them like on clearance racks, but and definitely saw a few of them later on at like swap meets and stuff. Back when vintage Star Wars figures, vintage Megos, vintage G.I. Joes, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe figures could be found at swap meets for like $2 or $3 a pop, 50 cents a pop back then. Early 90s swap meets, man. That was the time. But I was at an antique store not too long ago, and I saw some of they're really crappy. Some people listening might argue with me on this, but they came out with some action figures for the Tim Burton Planet of the Apes movie that are like really cheap and really like clunky and awkward looking. And I kind of fell in love with them. Almost like they're better, they're definitely more intriguing than the film. So I don't know. I've been thinking about those, but I'm definitely, that's the thing about the new films is you could essentially buy like a Schleich ape and maybe put some hang some like a bone belt on it or something and have it look like...
Yeah, you don't even need to do that.
You don't even need to do that. That's basically the apes from the newer films, which to me doesn't do it for me as much. I love that. I love the look of the original apes.
I'm going to go to bat for them, having just watched them really for the first time. And I really think you should give them another shot.
All right, I will.
Finish up the trilogy and then give the next one a chance. I stayed away from them for the same reason, because I was like, the nostalgia aspect of it isn't there because they're just apes.
Yeah.
But they are very well made. The stories are very well done. The first one, they get better. So it's a progression upward.
Yeah.
And that is what I would hear or read each time a new one came out. Like, this is better than this one. This is better. This is even better than the first two. And you don't get that in a lot of new franchises. It's usually diminishing returns. In this case, all signs pointed the other direction. First one I had pretty much seen caught on cable. I have a love-hate relationship with James Franco. I think he's a tool, but...
I'm with you on that.
You know, he does some interesting things as well as big-budget things, and this is one of those big-budget things. And there are nods to the originals throughout, and, you know, the original ape that they're testing this drug on is called Bright Eyes, and things like that. And then the ape that it gives birth to, they call Caesar. So it's an intriguing way to, you're kind of starting where maybe the third of the original movies is coming from, where the apes are becoming intelligent, not necessarily by necessity, but we're trying to do it. We're the people that make this happen. Which I actually think is more interesting than just apes traveling back in time. From an already advanced ape society, but you know, you could argue which is more interesting. I got over really quickly the absence of the masks, the makeup, and them wearing clothes and being more like humans, which is fun. But this is, I hate to say it, but it's a more realistic approach to how this could come about.
Yeah, I see that for sure. Yeah.
Apes can become the more intelligent, the dominant species.
Yeah.
And the second one, so we watched the first two last weekend, just Cleo and I, and then because my wife was doing schoolwork and stuff, and then she was like, "Hey, when you guys watch the third one, I want to watch it." So we watched it last night, and if you can sort of just lay aside this exists separate from those other movies.
Right.
CGI is very good for the most part, particularly the main orangutan in the film, Maurice, looks like a real ape. It's emotional. It's a human drama, but with apes, and it really, really gets you. And there's a lot of heart to them, and there's a lot of, like I said, emotion and feeling. And the third movie is kind of a gut-wrenching experience. And I really, really liked them, and would watch all three again.
Yeah.
In a hot second with no hesitation.
That's good to hear, because I've been hesitant, because I watched the first one and the second one, and I was like, it's all right, you know. But you said the name of the orangutan is Maurice, and I didn't realize this. That's a really great reference to the actor who played Dr. Zaius, Maurice Evans, who was the orangutan in the original film.
That's why that's there.
That's
and
fantastic.
Then, you know, Caesar has a baby named Cornelius.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
They start in that third one, just to kind of spoil it for you a little bit, but you do see an ape in clothes, and it's done so that it makes sense as to why this ape is wearing clothes, and it's a great performance by Steve Zahn. But there are names and other things throughout. The military group in the third one, they're all branded, and they have Alpha and Omega as their brand. Which is the name of the nuclear missile that they worship in the second film.
That's amazing.
So they're definitely worth a shot. I understand and kind of poo-pooed them for the same reason, but sometimes you have to let go of those preconceived notions and just enjoy something for what it is. And I think they did a really good job with them.
Yeah, you've sold me on revisiting them, that's for sure. I've been so hesitant, but I do want to add to this that when I saw the trailer for the newest film recently, I got excited, because it takes us back to that familiar territory a little bit of the humans being chased down by the apes, and so it got me kind of like, ooh, this is interesting that we're coming full circle here. My wife has this fear of apes, primarily chimpanzees. I've gotten her a little. I know. I've gotten her a little bit more
the main
I know
apes
they're the main apes. I know, and that's part of the issue too. Probably for me too, is like, well, do I want to put her through that? And I like to watch movies with her. She's fun to watch movies with. So, she did. So she saw the trailer for the new one too. So she might be feeling the itch to watch some with me. So we'll get into that. Maybe that'll be an addendum to a future episode. I'll talk about my experiencing those. But I do. My last thought is this: did you ever see the Edward G. Robinson performance footage of him playing Dr. Zaius? The test footage?
No.
It's absolutely terrifying, and I highly recommend you go watch that. He was originally the first Dr. Zaius. They did some test footage. The makeup is kind of terrifying.
Interesting.
I'd like to see one of these independent toy makers that do these sort of one-off fun toy projects do an Edward G. Robinson Planet of the Apes, Dr. Zaius. That would be cool. But yeah, go check that out. It's freaky.
Oh, I totally forgot to mention, speaking of Super 7 and kind of staying away from them, and I've told you this numerous times, this came up when I talked to Michael Pilmer, because the Funko Pops for Devo had come out, or one of them had come out, maybe both of them. So they did the yellow suits with their converted skateboard helmets and 3D mask, and then they did the Whip It one with the energy dome and the turtleneck and all that. So of course I got them, because there's not much else out there. And I had mentioned to him during that conversation, these would be great for Super 7 to do.
Yeah.
They were probably already working on it, and kudos to him for staying tight-lipped about it with me. Back, I guess it's been at least a year now, they were announced that they were doing Devo. And The first one they released corresponds to the first album, is Bob 2, who has also passed away. I think he died the year after Alan Myers did. So it's him with his guitar from the Satisfaction video in the yellow suit.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe the 3D glasses, like we've mentioned numerous times, they're $20. And $20 to me for a Kenner style figure is just too much. Yeah. And I've been waiting for them to drop because I would like to get them. It's a Star Wars figure, basically, of this band that I love.
Yeah.
You know what? I think I'm wrong. Actually, the Mark Mothersbaugh one came out first. That corresponds with the Freedom of Choice album and the Whip It video. So that one came out first. Sorry, caught myself on that. And which I thought was odd because it's not the first album, but I guess it's the most recognizable thing. So I was like, it's him in the outfit with a whip and a bowl of whipped cream. Bob 2 then comes out a little while later, and I'm thinking, I know at some point I'm going to get sucked into this, but I'd like them to be like 15 or less. They just haven't. I don't venture out like you do, so maybe I'd find them at a local store on clearance or something.
Just so you know, I haven't seen any of the Devo figures out in the stores. I would have definitely sent you an image if I had seen that. But yeah.
So knowing that this was going to be my next thing, I had decided actually right after our last recording that I was going to do Devo next. And I'm like, well, shit, let me look on Amazon. I know they're probably there. They had them both. They're at the retail price, but at least I'm not paying for shipping. So I went ahead and ordered them. One came like the next day, and then the Mark Mothersbaugh one came, within a week. So I had those. And then just last Sunday, I saw on Super 7 the image of Gerald Casale in the new Traditionalists outfit with the pompadour and the action vest. You could buy from their catalog back in the day. And I thought, this is going to be hard to not get. And I sent that to you and I was like, I guess I'm all in now or whatever. And then the very next day, the figure was released. It was on Super 7. So they did a real short preview. And then the next day they were available. And I was like, screw it. I'll just go ahead and get one. And then Michael Pilmer on his YouTube channel had already gotten some, so he did his review the day of the release. This one might actually be my favorite because I thought, boy, that vest looks odd when Super 7 and Devo and everybody else were showing the image of it on the card. It's a thing that would buckle under your crotch. So it's this vest that straps on, but it was kind of bulky. And I'm like, that's weird looking. Why did they sculpt it that way? And then as he did his unboxing and took the figure out, I realized, you can take it off.
Oh, that's cool.
Rubber vest that you can pull off over his head. And then he comes with the spud gun that they would use during that tour and stuff. So the other two are pretty iconic and more well-known maybe than this one. But I kind of love this one. So, I'm curious to see what they do next. I have a feeling that they won't do an Alan Myers figure since he's passed and there was, he split from the band and they've had 5 or 6 drummers since then. So I know when NECA did a line of figures of them years ago, it was whoever the drummer was at the time. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure. So anyway, I'm all in on the Reaction Devo figures now.
That's kind of how Super 7 succeeds in charging that amount for a small figure, especially with bands. People aren't going to buy every single rock star that Super 7 puts out. Maybe somebody will, but usually it's like, I love Jimi Hendrix, so I'll spend $20 to get the Jimi Hendrix, or I love Devo, I'll spend the $60 to get those 3 figures. They had sent out a thing saying, hey, if you have any ideas, respond. And I, of course, I sent out my response, and it involved the original Powell Peralta team. My idea was search for Animal Chin and that original team, but they did end up releasing Powell Peralta figures, which are cool. But I also mentioned the Melvins. I would love to see Melvins, but it's a similar dilemma. Melvins have had 5 different bassists, and so it'd really just be Buzzo and Dale, I think. But you never know.
Well, I had done the same thing, and my only suggestion was Devo.
There you go. We're helping Super 7 out with our ideas.
Yeah, I bought something, and they're like, "Hey, send us your suggestions."
Yeah.
And I did, and the response back was something like, it didn't imply that they were working on it, but it sort of rang that way to me in my head, like, okay.
Yeah.
And it wasn't too much longer after that they announced the first one.
They do those interesting projects, and it fulfills a need for folks, and I admire them for that. I do think the prices are too much or too high, but I can see why they would charge that amount. The packaging is usually the artwork on the card back's usually pretty great.
They are, and these are well done, and they're well illustrated, and they take the inspiration from the album that it's corresponding to and do it pretty accurately. And I know that Michael Pilmer is involved in all of that and making sure that things are done correctly, and that Mark Mothersbaugh has the correct glasses on, and this and that, and the sculpts are fairly generic, but they kind of vaguely resemble the guys a little bit, and they're not producing things in the numbers that Hasbro is,
right?
Which is why they can sell theirs for $12 instead of $20. I got sucked in. I'm in for however many they do. My original assumption was those first 5 albums, since they have very specific outfits for them, would be it. But they can actually dig still. They could do other outfits for each album, because in concert they would wear different things during that tour as well. There are all kinds of, and then there's things from the videos that they wore that were different.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, because I know that they do that with a lot of the heavy metal bands that they make reaction figures for, who have very specific looks, like Kiss for each album, Iron Maiden with the different Eddie versions of Eddie for each album.
Yeah, for sure.
Things like that. So
they did a action figure just of the metallic beast on the Motorhead album, or the Motorhead iconic what is that, like metallic beast creature that they use to represent themselves. They did a figure of that too. So that, and the Powell Peralta guys, it's not Tony Hawk, it's a action figure of Tony Hawk as the artwork from the skateboard. So it's like, these alternative or these interpretations of these people of importance that makes it interesting. And so, there's a ton of Devo options that they have available to them.
I'm kind of hoping that they do a Turkey Monkey or a Boogie Boy. So
right, they kind of have to. They kind of have to.
Boogie Boy is a definite possibility, but I don't know how they would do a Turkey Monkey. They'd have to release it as a vinyl figure, which I would love, but
that would be amazing. That would be amazing.
It would be pretty cool.
All right, so that was awesome. Mark, where can people find you, and do you have anything interesting coming up?
You can find me on all social media platforms at Wake Up Heavy. I tried to get on my website last night. I was looking into when I talked about Devo on Wake Up Heavy, and I wanted to look at that entry on my blog, and it wouldn't come up. So I'm not sure what the problem is. I know that my domain just switched from Google to Squarespace. I don't know if that's it or if it's the browser I'm on. So I'm hesitant to say go to wakeupheavy.com. I think this has happened in the past, and I don't know how to rectify it. Anyway, social media, look for the Chasing Chevy podcast in April on weirdandwaymedia.com. And I haven't done anything with Wake Up Heavy for a few months, and I don't really have anything planned. So we're on a hiatus again until I get inspired. How about you?
For me, I'm currently working on another Snake Mountain commission build. So if anybody's interested in watching me make this big playset, you can head over to my YouTube channel. I'm currently working on episode 8 right now, which is, I do these every weekend. I put out episode of me documenting the stage that I'm currently at with the build. So doing that this weekend. And, you can find me on Instagram under Skella Vader or Ronald Zurigian _projects. Or head over to the YouTube channel and check that stuff out over there. If you're interested in listening to episodes of Cambridge and with Sean a little bit earlier, you can become a Patreon for Skelevator, and that information is on my YouTube channel as well.
I'm surprised you didn't bring up the Dr. Zaius episode of The Simpsons.
Oh, God. Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius.
Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius. Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius. Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius. Oh, Dr. Zaius.
That might be one of the greatest things they ever did.
It's phenomenal. I mean, I agree. It's one of the best Simpsons episodes ever. Was that during Conan O'Brien, the Conan O'Brien years?
It'd be interesting to find out if Dana Gould was involved in that one.
I am willing to bet $1 that Dana Gould was involved in that one. We're going to do some research after we close up shop here today.
Gould was not involved in this episode of The Simpsons.
All right, folks. Until we meet again, have fun, stay weird, and keep collecting.
Thanks for listening.
Help, the human's about to escape.
Get your paws off me, you dirty ape!
He can talk.
He can talk, 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 he can talk! I can sing!
Ooh, help me, Dr. Zaius.
Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius. Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius. Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius. Oh, Dr. Zaius.
Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius.
What's wrong with me?
I think you're crazy.
Want a second opinion?
You're also lazy.
Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius. Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius. Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius. Oh, Dr. Zaius.
Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius.
Can I play the piano anymore?
Of course you can.
Well, I couldn't before. I hate every ape I see, from chimpanzee to chimpanzee. No, you'll never make a monkey out of me. Oh my God, I was wrong. It was Earth all along. You finally made a monkey.
Yes, we finally made a monkey.
Yes, you finally made a monkey out of me. I love you, Dr. Zaius.
Cambridge and with Sean is a Weirding Way Media podcast.